to pull the locomotive onto this turntable and spin it around for the return trip. This turntable you're looking at here was constructed in 1916 by the American Bridge and Iron Company in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. And it was used by the Central of Georgia Railroad in Macon, Georgia at their locomotive backshops. That is up until 1925 when they moved it to Cedartown, Georgia, where it was used at the end of a branch line. Now, we acquired the table in the 1980s, moved it to this location, and we've been using it here ever since, almost on a daily basis. This turntable is 80 feet long, and it weighs in at 80 tons. Keep in mind, the average school bus only weighs about 12 or 13 tons. But that locomotive right there, with a tender fully loaded coal and water, it weighs in at about 185 tons. So when it's on the table here, the overall weight between the two is going to be sitting right around 250 tons or so. So it'll probably surprise you to know that this table was originally turned by hand. It was an Armstrong table. There would have been poles extending off each end, and it would have taken about 4 people or so to push those poles and spin the table around. Do we have any volunteers? Anyone? I'm just kidding. Now, we do not do it that way anymore. Instead, we just use a small 25 horsepower motor under the operator's shed here that we had installed that our conductor Dave will be operating. Now, you may be wondering, how do they spin that much weight by hand? Well, to spin it by hand, and even by motor still today, we have to ensure the table is balanced. As the locomotive gets centered on the table here, over this large 6-foot ball bearing in the center, if you watch the far end of the table down here where I'll be at, you will see it drop by just a few inches. When it drops, we know the table is balanced. So when it drops, he stops. The locomotive pulling our train today is the Southern Railway 630, built in 1904 by the American Locomotive Company at their Richmond Works. At 117 years old, it is the oldest operating piece of equipment we have in our collection. It was built for the Southern Railway as a mainline freight locomotive, and it would do that for many decades before it would be retired and sold to the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad, where it was also used in freight service. Eventually, in the 60s, the Southern Railway would reacquire the locomotive for use on their mainline steam excursion program. And it pulled those for a number of decades before once again being retired in favor of larger and more powerful steam locomotives. So the successor Norfolk Southern Railway would donate the locomotive to us in 1999. We started a restoration on it in 2001, and that restoration was completed in 2011. We've been using it here ever since. This locomotive is a 280 consolidation, meaning it has 2 small pilot wheels in the front, 8 large draw wheels in the middle, and no trailing wheels under the cab and firebox. It operates at 190 psi, has 56-inch diameter driving wheels, and it produces 46,700 pounds of tractive effort, the equivalent of about 2,000 horsepower. Now, for those of you that are interested in this kind of thing, it is also the only operating locomotive, a standard gauge locomotive in the world that has this southern valve gear. Now, up here in the cab, you'll see our engineer, Brian. He's responsible for operating this locomotive and getting us here and back safely today, so everyone will go ahead and give him a wave. Now, the way this locomotive works is up in the cab, our fireman Tyler is feeding 3 to 6 tons of coal a day by hand into the firebox where it is burning. On the front side of the firebox, there are a series of tubes that run the length of the boiler. Those are called the flues. The hot gases from the fire travel through the flues and then up and out the stack. Surrounding the flues and the firebox is water. That water is heated by those hot gases and converts to steam. Steam, of course, does expand, raising the boiler pressure, in this case, up to 190 psi. When Brian opens that throttle, that steam is channeled down into these large cylinders and thrown on either side of the engine. Inside those cylinders is a large piston the steam is pushing on either side of. Those pistons are connected to the rod you see on the side of the engine, and those rods are, of course, connected to the driving wheels. So as the piston is being moved in and out, it is rotating those rods, therefore turning the driving wheels and propelling the locomotive. Then after that steam has been used, it is mixed with the hot gases in the smoke box here at the front of the locomotive, and then it shoots up and out the stack. And that exhausting steam is what creates the chugging sound you hear when you see a steam locomotive. If you look up at the cab again, now that we're facing the opposite direction, you'll see our fireman Tyler. He's responsible for feeding that coal as well as maintaining the water level to produce all the steam needed for this locomotive to operate. So give him a wave as well. And you may have noticed our train is still sitting on track 1, but we've lined the locomotive up for track 2. That is so we can do a runaround. What that means is the locomotive is going to go past our train and then through a switch. So we'll then reverse the switch back in a track 1, pick up to the opposite end of the train. So what was the front is now back.